The Duke looked at the woman he had once betrayed and realized she no longer loved him. Years earlier, he had faked losing his memory so he could marry her younger sister without ruining his reputation. Her own parents believed the lie and asked her to give him up, just as they had asked her to surrender everything else throughout her life. She left without a single accusation. When she returned to London, she was no longer the abandoned woman everyone pitied. She had become the marchioness of his greatest rival, and the happiest woman in the room. By the time the Duke learned the truth, it was already too late. Before we continue, please do me a favor, subscribe to this channel, and let us know in the comments where you are watching from. Enjoy the story. Lady Marisol Wickliffe learned the meaning of sacrifice long before she understood the meaning of love. Her earliest memories were not of nursery games or bedtime stories, but of surrendering things that made her happy. When she was 7, she received a beautiful blue ribbon from her grandmother. She treasured it for exactly one afternoon before her younger sister admired it. Lady Beatrice Wickliffe smiled gently and untied the ribbon from Marisol's hair herself. "You are the eldest," she said warmly. "Surely you can give in a little for your sister." Marisol nodded, though tears burned behind her eyes. She watched Anne skip away with the ribbon while everyone praised her generosity. No one noticed her disappointment. As the years passed, the pattern never changed. If Anne admired a dress, Marisol was reminded that she already owned several fine gowns. If both sisters wished to ride the same spirited mare, Marisol was told an elder sister should always set an example. If Anne grew upset after losing a game, everyone expected Marisol to let her win the next one. Each sacrifice seemed small on its own. Together, they became her childhood. Lord Edwin Wickliffe rarely questioned the arrangement. Peace within the household mattered more to him than fairness. If surrendering one daughter's wishes prevented arguments, he considered it a reasonable price. Lady Beatrice believed she was teaching kindness. Instead, she taught her eldest daughter that love was earned by giving away pieces of herself. Marisol accepted every lesson without complaint. She learned to smile while letting go. She learned to hide disappointment before anyone could see it. Most of all, she learned never to ask why her happiness always seemed less important than her sister's. By the time she entered London society, she had become everything a young lady was expected to be: graceful, soft-spoken, accomplished, gentle. She danced beautifully, conversed with quiet intelligence, and carried herself with effortless dignity. Yet she rarely drew attention to herself. Years of standing aside had become second nature. Anne, on the other hand, flourished beneath society's gaze. Her golden hair, lively wit, and playful charm attracted admirers wherever she went. She enjoyed every compliment and every envious glance from other young ladies. Marisol never begrudged her sister the attention. She simply believed there was enough happiness for everyone. Then the Duke of Greyhaven entered her life. His arrival stirred every drawing room in London. A wealthy duke remained the most sought-after gentleman of the season, and mothers immediately began calculating which daughter might capture his interest. Many assumed he would notice Anne first. Instead, he approached Marisol. Their first dance surprised the entire ballroom. Their second caused whispers. By the third ball, those whispers had become certainty. The Duke sought only Lady Marisol Wickliffe. He requested every dance that etiquette allowed. He called at Wickliffe Manor each week with impeccable courtesy. He spoke with Lord Edwin about history, estate management, and Parliament before asking permission to accompany Marisol through the gardens. He listened when she spoke. Not because politeness required it, because he genuinely seemed interested. For the first time in her life, Marisol experienced something unfamiliar. She felt chosen. She caught herself smiling more often. She laughed without immediately wondering whether someone else deserved the happiness instead. Even Lady Beatrice remarked that her eldest daughter looked brighter than she had in years. Before long, society reached the same conclusion. The future Duchess of Greyhaven would almost certainly be Lady Marisol Wickliffe. Dressmakers quietly anticipated wedding commissions. Hostesses spoke of little else. Even the servants at Wickliffe Manor began treating Marisol with the respectful excitement reserved for a future duchess. Anne congratulated her with flawless grace. She smiled. She embraced her sister. She praised the match before anyone who would listen. Marisol believed every word. She never noticed how often Anne disappeared during crowded gatherings. She never questioned why the Duke occasionally excused himself from a ballroom only to return several minutes later. She never imagined that the happiest season of her life rested upon a foundation she could not see. Somewhere beyond the glittering chandeliers and polished smiles, choices were already being made. Promises were already being broken. And while Marisol dreamed of the future she believed awaited her, someone else had already begun reaching for the one thing that had finally belonged to her. Have you ever watched someone sacrifice so much for family that they eventually lost themselves? Share your thoughts below, because Marisol's greatest sacrifice has only just begun. In the days that followed, London spoke of little except the future Duchess of Greyhaven. Then news spread across London before sunset. The Duke of Greyhaven's carriage had overturned while returning from a neighbouring estate. Witnesses described frightened horses, shattered wheels, and servants rushing to pull their master from the wreckage. Rumours exaggerated every detail. Some claimed he had nearly died. Others insisted the carriage had rolled down an embankment. By the time the Wickliffe family arrived at Greyhaven House, the truth was less dramatic. The Duke had survived. His injuries were minor. A bandage wrapped around his forehead, and the physicians insisted he would recover fully with rest. Relief flooded Marisol's heart. She stepped toward the bed, eager to see him awake. After what felt like an eternity, the Duke slowly opened his eyes. The room fell silent. The physicians asked simple questions first. He answered everyone without hesitation. He knew his name, his title, his estates. He recognized every servant standing nearby. He remembered his closest friends. Nothing appeared unusual. Then his gaze settled upon Anne. His expression softened with unmistakable relief. "Thank heaven," he murmured, reaching weakly toward her hand. "I feared our engagement would never come to pass." Silence swallowed the room. One physician frowned. "Your Grace, do you mean Lady Marisol?" The Duke looked genuinely confused. "Marisol." His eyes shifted toward the elder sister. He studied her face with quiet politeness, as though searching his memory for a passing acquaintance. Nothing came. "I'm afraid," he said carefully, "I do not believe we have met." Marisol stared at him. Surely she had misunderstood. She stepped closer until she stood beside his bed. "It is me," she whispered. "Marisol." The Duke searched her face again before slowly shaking his head. "I am sorry, my lady." His voice carried neither cruelty nor embarrassment, only calm certainty. "I do not know you." The words struck harder than any blow. Marisol forced herself to smile. "You asked my father for permission to court me. No recognition. We danced together throughout the season. Nothing. You promised." A physician gently interrupted. "My lady, please." Another exchanged a thoughtful glance with his colleague. A severe shock to the head may disturb memory in unusual ways. Certain faces or events can disappear while everything else remains intact. The explanation settled over the room with uncomfortable ease. Before Marisol could speak again, Anne clasped the Duke's hand. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "Please do not force yourself," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The physicians warned you not to strain your memory." She looked every inch the devoted fiancé. Her grief appeared effortless. Every glance toward the Duke overflowed with concern. Every trembling breath invited sympathy. Even the servants watched her with admiration. No one questioned why she already behaved as though she had always belonged beside his bed. Marisol looked desperately toward her parents. Surely they would correct the mistake. Lord Edwin remained silent for several moments before drawing a measured breath. "If his grace remembers your sister as his intended bride," he said slowly, "perhaps we ought not distress him further." Marisol turned sharply toward him. "Father!" He avoided her eyes. "The physicians have advised against agitation." Her heartbeat quickened. "He was courting me." Lady Beatrice stepped beside her and gently took her hand. Her touch was familiar. So were the words that followed. "You are the eldest." Marisol closed her eyes. "Mother, surely you can give in a little for your sister." The sentence carried every memory of her childhood. The blue ribbon, the favorite horse, the dresses, the birthdays, every sacrifice she had accepted without complaint. Now they expected her to surrender the man she loved. She searched every face in the room. The physicians accepted what the family accepted. The servants obeyed their master's wishes. Anne continued weeping beside the Duke, never releasing his hand. Tristan looked at Marisol with courteous regret, exactly as any gentleman might regard a stranger experiencing unfortunate confusion. No one defended her, not one person. Within days, London's drawing rooms buzzed with speculation. Many pitied the Duke's strange loss of memory. Others called it a tragic twist of fate. No one dared accuse an injured Duke of deception. As the whispers spread, Anne rarely left Greyhaven House. She read aloud while the Duke rested. She accompanied him through the gardens as his strength returned. Visitors praised her unwavering devotion. Each compliment deepened the lie. Whenever Marisol entered the room, Tristan greeted her with distant courtesy. Each greeting stripped away another piece of hope. Soon, both families reached the same conclusion. The wedding should proceed without delay. Postponement would only encourage gossip. Marriage would silence every rumor before it could grow. Whether the bride was the elder daughter or the younger mattered little to those determined to preserve the alliance between two distinguished families. Preparations began almost immediately. Florists arrived with sketches. Dressmakers carried rolls of silk through Wycliffe Manor. Invitations were discussed over breakfast. The wedding that had once been planned for Marisol quietly became Anne's. No one asked whether the change had broken her heart. They simply expected her to endure it, as she always had. The morning of the wedding arrived beneath a clear autumn sky. Wycliffe Manor stirred before sunrise. Servants hurried through the corridors, carrying flowers, polished silver, and carefully folded lengths of lace. Musicians arrived at the front entrance. Carriages rolled across the gravel drive, bringing relatives eager to witness the marriage that promised to unite two distinguished families. No one knocked upon Marisol's door. No one asked whether she wished to attend. She had become an afterthought inside the very house where she had spent her entire life trying to please everyone else. She stood beside the window of her bedchamber, watching the gardens where Tristan had once spoken of their future. Every promise had belonged to another life. A soft knock finally came. Lady Beatrice entered carrying a small parcel. Inside rested a prayer book Marisol had owned since childhood. "I thought you might like to keep this," her mother said quietly. Marisol accepted it with both hands. "Thank you." Lady Beatrice hesitated before speaking again. "Time heals every disappointment." Marisol lifted her eyes to meet her mother's. "This was never a disappointment, Mother." Her voice remained calm. "It was a choice." Silence settled between them. Her mother lowered her gaze. She had no answer. Marisol embraced her briefly before stepping away. There was no anger in her farewell, only acceptance. She had spent years believing that if she loved enough, yielded enough, and forgave enough, someone would one day choose her. Now she understood the truth. Her parents had chosen. Tristan had chosen. Anne had chosen. Only she had never been given a choice at all. She picked up a single traveling case. Without announcing her departure, she walked through the quiet servants' entrance and left Wycliffe Manor behind. The chapel bells began ringing as her carriage rolled away from the estate. She did not look back. By the time vows were exchanged inside the village church, Marisol was already miles from London. Each passing field carried her farther from whispered pity and carefully rehearsed lies. Her destination was the home of her widowed aunt, who lived peacefully in the countryside, far removed from the endless calculations of the marriage market. The journey lasted most of the day. When the carriage finally reached the modest estate, the air felt different. There were no crowds, no curious visitors. Only wide meadows, ancient oak trees, and the quiet sound of birds settling among the branches. Her aunt welcomed her without questions. She simply embraced her. You may stay as long as you wish. Nothing more was required. For the first time in months, Marisol slept through the night. The days that followed unfolded with gentle simplicity. She walked through Rose Gardens after breakfast. She helped arrange flowers in the drawing room. She spent long afternoons reading beside open windows while cool country breezes drifted through the house. No one compared her to Anne. No one reminded her to surrender another piece of herself. The silence she found there did not feel lonely. It felt peaceful. Slowly, the constant ache inside her chest became easier to bear. One crisp morning, while walking along a woodland path bordering the neighboring estate, she noticed a gentleman examining the hoof of his horse. The animal had thrown a shoe, leaving its rider to continue on foot while a groom rode ahead to summon the blacksmith. Marisol recognized him immediately. Clifford Norwood, the Marquis of Norwood. London knew him as the Duke of Greyhaven's longtime rival, though few could explain how the rivalry had begun. She inclined her head politely. "My lord." Before she could continue, the hem of her dress caught upon a thorn bush. The delicate fabric refused to come free. She reached down to untangle it herself, but the thorns only tightened their grip. Without a word, the Marquis removed his gloves and knelt beside the tangled fabric. His movements were careful. Unhurried, he freed each thread without tearing the material. "There," he said, stepping back once the last thorn released its hold. "The roses have surrendered." Marisol looked down at the untouched fabric before meeting his warm hazel eyes. A faint smile appeared despite herself. "I believe they have," he smiled in return. It would have been a pity to lose such fine work to stubborn branches. Most gentlemen would have filled the silence by mentioning London, or the Duke, or the rumours that had spread through every ballroom after her sudden departure. Clifford did none of those things. Instead, he glanced toward the winding path ahead. "The river is particularly beautiful this time of year," he said. "If you continue another quarter-mile, you'll find the willow trees reflected across the water." It was an ordinary observation. Nothing more, yet it carried something she had not realized she missed: normalcy. He tipped his hat with quiet courtesy. "I wish you a pleasant walk, Lady Marisol." "And you, my lord." They continued in opposite directions. Marisol walked a few more steps before realizing something had changed. For the first time since leaving London, she had smiled without forcing herself. The feeling was unfamiliar, small, fragile, yet unmistakably real. Hope had not returned all at once. It arrived as quietly as the countryside itself. Life at her aunt's cottage settled into a gentle rhythm. Each morning, Marisol helped gather flowers from the garden before breakfast. Afternoons were spent reading beneath the shade of ancient oaks or walking the winding paths that stretched between neighboring estates. The countryside asked nothing of her. It did not measure her worth by the title she might marry. It did not whisper about broken engagements or forgotten promises. For the first time since leaving London, she no longer woke expecting another piece of her happiness to be taken away. One bright morning, while following a woodland path lined with wild roses, she noticed a familiar gentleman walking ahead. Clifford Norwood, the Marquis of Norwood. He recognized her at once and inclined his head with easy courtesy. "Lady Marisol, my lord." He slowed his pace. "I trust your aunt is well." "Very well, thank you. And have the roses behaved themselves since our last encounter?" She looked toward the bushes bordering the path and smiled. "I believe they have learned their lesson." "I should hope so." They know you would come to my rescue again. His quiet laugh carried through the trees. I doubt they fear me quite that much. They continued walking together without either suggesting it. Their conversation wandered from the unusually warm autumn weather to the river that wound through the neighboring valley. Clifford pointed toward a cluster of distant trees. The swans usually return before winter. If you enjoy quiet places, the riverbank beyond those willows is worth visiting. I shall remember that. He never asked why she had disappeared from London. He never mentioned the Duke of Greyhaven. He never treated her as the subject of gossip. He simply spoke to her as though she were any other lady enjoying a walk through the countryside. That ordinary kindness meant more than polished compliments ever could. Their meetings became frequent without either of them arranging them. Some days they encountered one another near the river. Other mornings they met while riding along neighboring lanes. When rain kept them indoors, Clifford occasionally called upon her aunt with a newly published history book or news of a lecture delivered in Oxford that he thought might interest Marisol. He discovered she preferred history to poetry. She learned he had an unexpected talent for making even the driest historical debates amusing. He listened carefully whenever she spoke. If she disagreed with him, he welcomed the discussion instead of trying to prove himself right. Marisol found herself speaking more freely than she ever had in London. One afternoon, Lady Agnes Norwood sent an invitation requesting the pleasure of Lady Marisol's company for tea. Her aunt smiled as she handed over the letter. I believe the Marchioness Dowager has taken an interest in you. Marisol accepted the invitation with quiet curiosity. Norwood House possessed none of the grandeur meant to impress visitors. It felt lived in, warm, welcoming. Lady Agnes greeted her herself rather than leaving the task to servants. My dear Lady Marisol, I have been looking forward to meeting the young woman my son speaks so highly of. The words caught Marisol by surprise. Clifford had spoken about her, not as a scandal, not as an object of pity, simply as someone worth knowing. Tea passed easily. They spoke about books, gardens, village charities, and the changing season. When Lady Agnes offered her another slice of lemon cake, Marisol instinctively declined. You are already too generous. Nonsense, Lady Agnes replied with a gentle smile. Take it. Marisol accepted the plate. I am sorry. I did not mean to. Lady Agnes tilted her head. There it is again. Marisol looked puzzled. What is? You apologized. A faint blush touched Marisol's cheeks. I suppose I did. My son tells me you do it rather often. Lady Agnes folded her hands. You apologized before sitting down. You apologized before accepting tea. Now you've apologized for accepting cake. Marisol gave an embarrassed smile. I had not noticed. Lady Agnes studied her with kind eyes. Who taught you that receiving kindness must always be earned? The question settled over the room. Marisol searched for an answer. She remembered ribbons surrendered without complaint. Dreams quietly abandoned. A future handed to someone else because she had been told it was the right thing to do. She could not remember affection that had not required a sacrifice. Her silence answered the question. Lady Agnes reached across the table and gently covered Marisol's hand. Listen to me carefully, child. Her voice was warm, steady. A family should never measure one daughter against another. The words shattered something grief had left untouched. Tears slipped down Marisol's cheeks before she could stop them. Lady Agnes rose and embraced her. No conditions, no expectations, only love. It was the first embrace Marisol had ever received that asked nothing in return. From that afternoon onward, Norwood House became more than a neighbouring estate. It became a home where Marisol was welcomed exactly as she was. The months passed almost unnoticed. She laughed more easily. She stopped apologizing for every kindness. She no longer questioned whether she deserved happiness. One crisp autumn afternoon, she and Clifford stood overlooking the lake beyond Aldermere Hall. The water lay perfectly still beneath the golden trees. I know another man once asked for your future, Clifford said quietly. I am not asking for what remains after that. He turned to face her. I am asking for everything you are today. He offered his hand. Nothing more, nothing less. I love the woman you have become, Lady Marisol. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Marisol looked into his warm hazel eyes. There was no pressure, no expectation, only a choice that belonged entirely to her. She placed her hand in his. Yes, for the first time in her life, she chose a future that did not require her to surrender herself to deserve it. What does true love look like to you? Share your thoughts below, because Marisol has finally learned that real love is never won through sacrifice. It is freely given and freely returned. Their wedding took place on a quiet autumn morning in the village church. There were no crowds gathered outside. No curious spectators gathered outside to witness the ceremony. No ambitious families hoping to secure introductions to titled noblemen. Only those who truly cared for them filled the small stone church. Marisol stood near the altar in a gown chosen for no one's approval but her own. It was elegant without extravagance, beautiful without demanding attention. Lady Agnes Norwood stood behind her, carefully fastening the bridal veil. Her hands were gentle, steady. When the last pin was secured, she stepped back and admired the young woman before her. Emotion shimmered in her eyes. I was blessed with a son, she said softly. Today, heaven has blessed me with a daughter. Marisol's composure broke, not from sorrow, from hearing words she had waited her entire life to receive. She turned and embraced Lady Agnes. The older woman held her tightly. No conditions, no expectations, only love. When they finally parted, Lady Agnes brushed a tear from Marisol's cheek. You owe us nothing, my dear. You have already given us more than you know. Marisol smiled through tears. For the first time, she believed those words. The church bells rang across the countryside as Clifford waited before the altar. His expression held quiet happiness, not triumph, not pride, only gratitude. As Marisol walked toward him, she realized she felt no fear. There was nothing left to prove, nothing left to surrender. She was simply walking toward the man who had chosen her every day without asking her to become someone else. Their vows were spoken without hesitation. Each promise carried the weight of choice rather than obligation. When the ceremony ended, the villagers gathered outside with warm smiles and heartfelt blessings. No one spoke about the past. They celebrated the future. The small wedding breakfast that followed felt more like a family gathering than a noble celebration. Laughter replaced polite conversation. Stories replaced formal speeches. Lady Agnes insisted Marisol sit beside her, reaching across the table more than once to refill her teacup before it was empty. Each gesture was effortless, natural. Marisol found herself laughing without restraint. She no longer wondered whether someone else deserved the happiness more. She simply accepted it. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Life at Norwood House settled into peaceful routines. Clifford never tried to erase her past. He simply built a future where it no longer held power over her. Every morning they walked through the gardens together before beginning the day's responsibilities. Every evening they shared quiet conversations before the library fire. Love did not arrive through grand declarations. It revealed itself through countless ordinary moments. News of their marriage traveled quickly through London. Many remembered the abandoned daughter who had disappeared before the Duke of Greyhaven's wedding. Few expected her to become the Marchioness of Norwood. Fewer still expected her husband to be the one nobleman the Duke of Greyhaven had spent years trying to surpass. The announcement reached Greyhaven House during breakfast. Tristan unfolded the newspaper with little interest. His attention lingered on one notice. Lady Marisol Wickliffe had become Marchioness of Norwood. He read the announcement twice, then once more. Across the table, Anne noticed his silence. She leaned closer and glanced at the printed page. A small smile curved her lips. It seems my sister has found someone after all, Tristan folded the newspaper carefully. I see that. His voice remained composed, yet something about the news unsettled him. He had expected Marisol to withdraw from society forever. Instead, she had married. Not merely married. She had married Clifford Norwood, the one man whose success had irritated him for years. The following season brought London's grandest assemblies back to life. The Royal Conservatory ballroom glittered beneath hundreds of candles as the nobility gathered once more. Conversations paused as a newly arrived couple entered the ballroom. The Marchioness and Marquis of Norwood. Marisol wore no expression of triumph. She sought no attention. She greeted old acquaintances with quiet warmth before accepting Clifford's arm as they crossed the ballroom. She looked peaceful, confident, entirely at ease. Gone was the woman who had once entered every room wondering whether she belonged there. Tristan noticed her almost immediately. His conversation faded into the background. He watched as she smiled at something Clifford whispered. The smile reached her eyes. He realized with growing discomfort that she looked happier than she ever had during their courtship. Not because she possessed a higher title, not because society admired her, because she no longer carried the weight she once bore. Anne followed his gaze. She saw exactly what he saw. Marisol was no longer searching crowded rooms for the Duke. She never looked in his direction. She laughed freely beside her husband, completely unaware of the attention she attracted. For the first time in years, Anne felt something unfamiliar tighten inside her. She had won. She had taken everything she believed her sister wanted. So why did Marisol look like the happier woman? The answer refused to leave her thoughts. As the music filled the ballroom and polite conversation continued around them, Anne found herself watching her sister far more often than anyone else. The victory she had celebrated for so long no longer felt quite as satisfying as it once had. The Royal Conservatory ballroom hummed with music and polite conversation. Ladies drifted between the dance floor and the refreshment tables, while gentlemen discussed parliament, estates, and the latest society marriages. Marisol stood beside Clifford as they greeted familiar faces with quiet ease. She no longer entered a ballroom hoping to be noticed. She belonged exactly where she was. After one dance, Clifford excused himself to speak with an elderly family friend. I shall return presently, Marisol smiled. I will be here. She wandered toward the conservatory, drawn by the cool evening air that filtered through the glass. The scent of roses filled the quiet space. She paused beside a marble fountain, enjoying a rare moment away from the crowded ballroom. Footsteps sounded behind her. I wondered whether I would find you alone. Marisol turned. Anne stood in the doorway, her emerald gown catching the light. Her smile carried none of the warmth she displayed before society. I thought congratulations were in order, Anne said lightly. Marisol met her gaze. Thank you, Anne's smile tightened. You seem remarkably content. I am. The simple answer unsettled Anne more than any sharp reply could have done. She folded her arms. I expected you to resent me. I did once. And now, I no longer have reason to. Anne gave a quiet laugh. You have always been too forgiving. Marisol said nothing. Silence invited Anne to continue. It was always so easy. She wandered slowly through the conservatory, trailing her gloved fingers across the leaves. If I admired something, everyone expected you to surrender it. Marisol remembered the blue ribbon, the favorite horse, the countless little losses that had shaped her childhood. Anne smiled to herself. You never learned to refuse me. I have learned. Anne ignored the remark. When Tristan began courting you, I could not understand it. Her voice remained calm, almost amused. For the first time in our lives, something belonged only to you. She turned to face her sister. I could not allow that. Marisol remained still. Anne mistook her silence for defeat. What began as secret conversations became something more. She smiled with unmistakable satisfaction. When the accident presented itself, everything became wonderfully simple. Marisol's expression did not change. There was never any accident worth fearing. Anne laughed softly. The carriage overturned exactly as planned. The injuries were insignificant, and the memory loss, Anne's smile widened, practiced. She spoke the word with pride. Every confused glance, every forgotten promise, every question answered with perfect uncertainty. She shook her head, admiring the deception. Tristan played his part beautifully. Marisol looked at her quietly. So did you? Anne inclined her head with mock gratitude. The physicians believed every word. So did mother and father. Once they agreed to remain silent, no one questioned anything. She stepped closer. I took the Duke exactly as I took everything else. I won. She waited. She expected tears, anger, despair. Instead, Marisol smiled. It was gentle, peaceful, almost grateful. Anne stared at her in confusion. You are smiling. I am. Why? Marisol looked through the conservatory windows toward the ballroom. Clifford had just entered, searching the room until his eyes found hers. A quiet smile crossed his face. Marisol returned it before looking back at her sister. Because I owe you my gratitude, Anne frowned. What could you possibly mean? If you had not taken Tristan, Marisol's voice remained calm. I would never have met the man who truly chose me. She glanced toward Clifford once more. He never asked me to become less so someone else could have more. He never asked me to surrender pieces of myself to deserve his love. For the first time in my life, I know what it feels like to belong. Anne's confidence faltered. You're pretending. No. I finally stopped competing. Footsteps approached behind the doorway. Neither sister noticed. Tristan had entered the conservatory moments earlier, searching for Anne. Her last words stopped him where he stood. The carriage overturned exactly as planned. Every sentence that followed struck with growing force. There was never any memory loss. Tristan played his part beautifully. I took the Duke exactly as I took everything else. I won. The certainty he had carried for months vanished. He looked at Anne, then at Marisol. The truth stood before him without accusation. Marisol slipped her hand into Clifford's as he reached her side. There you are, he said softly. I was wondering where you had disappeared. She smiled. I was saying goodbye to the past. Clifford looked at her with quiet understanding. He asked no questions. Together they left the conservatory. Neither looked back. Silence settled over the room. Anne slowly turned. Only then did she see Tristan standing in the doorway, the color drained from her face. He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse her. He simply looked at her as though seeing her clearly for the first time. Every victory she had celebrated shared the same pattern. Each one had belonged to Marisol before she claimed it. The blue ribbon, the praise, the attention, the Duke. A cold realization settled over him. Anne had never fought for him because she loved him. She had fought because he was the last possession that had belonged to her sister. He had mistaken obsession for devotion. He had destroyed an honest woman to become the prize in someone else's lifelong rivalry. For the first time since the deception began, the weight of his own choices became impossible to escape. The confession in the conservatory changed nothing for Marisol. It changed everything for Tristan. The silence that followed Anne's careless triumph settled over Greyhaven House long after they returned home. For the first time since their marriage, Tristan began seeing what had always been before him. Anne rarely spoke of their future. She spoke of victories. She reminded him how every envy she had ever carried ended the same way. If Marisol possessed it first, Anne would not rest until it became hers. The favorite horse, the admiration of society. Even him, a painful truth emerged one memory at a time. He had never been the desire of Anne's heart. He had been the final prize in a rivalry she refused to lose. Everything he had sacrificed, his honor, his word, and the trust of a woman who loved him without reservation, had been exchanged for a marriage built upon jealousy instead of love. Meanwhile, life moved peacefully at Norwood House. Marisol no longer measured happiness by what had once been taken from her. She measured it by what she received each day without ever having to ask. One afternoon, Lady Agnes entered the drawing room, carrying a basket of freshly cut roses from the garden. "My dear daughter," she said with a warm smile, "would you help me arrange these before dinner?" Marisol looked up from her book. "Daughter," the word still carried quiet wonder each time she heard it. She rose and embraced Lady Agnes with the same affection she had once longed to receive from her own mother. Nothing about the moment was extraordinary. That was precisely what made it precious. Love had become ordinary, steady, certain. Clifford entered a few moments later and smiled at the sight before him. Without a word, he joined them, carefully trimming the stems while Marisol arranged the flowers beside Lady Agnes. No one competed for affection. No one demanded sacrifice. They simply belonged to one another. Months later, at another gathering of London's nobility, Tristan watched from across the ballroom as Marisol laughed beside Clifford. She no longer searched the room for him. She no longer carried the sadness he had placed in her heart. She had forgotten the future he once promised because she had found one far better. For the first time, Tristan understood the full measure of his loss. Marisol had loved him with complete sincerity. She had trusted him without reservation. Instead of protecting that love, he had traded it for deception and pride. No apology could restore what he had destroyed. No regret could return the years he had stolen from her. The greatest punishment was never scandal. It was standing only a few steps away from the life he might have shared, knowing another man now lived it because that man had made the one choice Tristan never did. He chose her, not for advantage, not for reputation, not to win, simply because he loved her, and Marisol chose him in return. Some hearts can be deceived, some futures can be stolen, but love cannot. Love is never a prize to be won from another person. It is a choice freely given by one heart to another. Do you believe Tristan deserved forgiveness after everything he had done, or was losing Marisol forever the only ending he truly deserved? Share your thoughts below.